All right, and we are live. What is up, my brothers? Play to Win episode number 66. And my guest, who is in a totally different time zone, I think last time we talked, he was in Poland, is not here. But I always start the show when the show is due to start. So I'm hoping that he gets my email and gets his clock set and hops in soon. I'm going to cover some of the stuff that he sent me because we talked a couple weeks ago about these new proposed taxes that are going to be threatening homeowners. And it's starting, of course, in my home country of Canada, but I've seen discussions like this in other countries around the world. So before we get started, though, do me some solids. Hit the thumbs up, the like button. Just helps out with the algorithms. Very kind of you to participate. And I wanted to just recap real quick because I pinned it in the live chat there. My School of Entrepreneurship is currently open for enrollment. I opened it up earlier this week. The enrollment period closes on Friday. Sorry, not Friday, Saturday on the 30th. And we'll start doing the deliverables and the Zoom calls and answer people's questions that go through the material. So essentially what this is, and again, the link is pinned in the live chat. If you're watching the replay, I'll put it in the description and pinned in the top comment as well. But I've had a lot of people request over the years, Rich, put out more content on entrepreneurship. How do I start a business? I'm tired of working a job. JOB, by the way, is an acronym for just over broke. And they hit their heads up against a glass ceiling and they're looking to make more of themselves. They want to start a business. That's really the only way that you can do it in today's world and environment. And the other side of the coin is the guys that are currently running something, but it's not profitable for them. It's not making them proper money. It's a headache. They have HR issues. They've structured the business in such a way that it's a nightmare for them. All the information I've put in these lectures, there's about 4.5 hours of them. And if you guys click the link, it'll bring you through here with the landing page and tell you a little bit about my past, a lot of the stuff that I've done. But down over here, you'll see the course curriculum. I deal with everything that you need to know when it comes to having the correct mindset around screwing your head on properly so that you start a business that is going to serve you and make you money and be fun and profitable. And ideally, if you structure it right, location independent, and it gets you away from all the nightmares that most people get themselves in. What most people don't understand is that the vast majority of people that are starting businesses up never crack more than $1 million a year in annual sales. And they generally build something that is quite frustrating and annoying and unprofitable for them to run. They generally self-employ themselves, right? Like they create a business that employs themselves. And all they do is they move from a JOB, a job, over to something where they're essentially an employee of their own business, only with more risk exposure to legal issues, HR, tax liabilities, government regulations, and all that sort of stuff. So I've put this out there. It's open for enrollment right now. You can go check it out. Everything's there on the landing page. The enrollment period closes again in 2 days on the 30th. So if it's something that you're interested in, go have a look. And if there's any questions, I'll deal with them live in the chat as we're doing the show. Let me throw up the post here that I got from David. Let me check my email, see if he's gotten back to me, because he was messaging me this morning about, yeah, let's do it. I'm excited. Time zone issues, man. Time zone issues. They tend to cause problems from time to time. Here it is. So if you're not familiar, I did a cast with him about, I don't know, 30 episodes back or so, if I got the number right. And David is he's a trained lawyer. He doesn't practice law anymore, but that was his background. And in the last cast, we talked a lot about the importance of having multiple passports, being able to maneuver, and move from country to country. One of the things that he made very clear during the last cast is that you don't actually own your passport. So, I mean, look, we've seen what happened in the last year, a couple of years anyway, with the beer bug and the overreach of power and control from government. It still exists today in Canada. I mean, I'm a pureblood, so I can't travel outside of the country still on federal airlines. I can drive across the border, so I'm going to be dealing with that in a little bit. But like they have the right to say, you know what, sir, Mr. Cooper, we're going to take away your passport because we don't, for whatever reason, they don't even have to tell you probably. and you're not able to fly, without a passport. So one of the arguments that David made the last time that we were talking, and he used kind of like a high value client as an example. I think he said he had a Kuwaiti client of his that was trying to get funds or travel. It was tied into finance, and it was a large sum of money that was tied up. And because the government in the country that he had resided in put a limitation on travel and movement of funds, he put himself in a pretty precarious predicament where he had pretty much like 95% of his cash locked up. So he made the argument in that last cast. You guys can go back and watch that. I wanted to talk to David a little bit more. Hopefully he'll still show up if he gets the email and hops in. But the thing that I wanted to hit on with this one is this publication that he put out on his website at Lesperance and Associates. The title is Principal Residence Capital Gains Exemption Under Threat in Canada. So if you're not familiar, in most places in the world still, you can buy a house, live in it. When you sell it, whatever capital gains that you make off it are completely tax-free. It's, I think, probably one of the last tax-free havens, with the exception of a TFSA, which stands for Tax-Free Savings Account here in Canada, which doesn't allow you to set aside much. I think it's maximum about $80,000, $90,000 to this at the time of this recording right now, but they add an extra like $5,000 a year to it, sort of thing. There's no real tax-free savings vessels. And for the most part, most people that retire here in Canada aren't retiring on their pensions or any retirement savings plans that they've set aside. It's generally the value, the appreciated value in their home. And he uses an example in here, which I think is fairly accurate. So I'm just going to kind of go through this and I'll read it out to you. At present, your primary residence may secure you a comfortable retirement. For Canadian taxpayers, and again, this is not limited to Canada. I mean, if you listen closely to what your legislators and policymakers talk about in Parliament when it comes to raising tax revenue or creating tax revenue for the country, if you've been asleep the last couple of years, let me remind you that the money supply in the United States has doubled in the course of 2 years over its entire lifetime. Okay, so they've printed more money than any other time in history for stimulus, to send out checks to people. When they took away their jobs and shut down businesses, and they had to give the money to pay rent. There was a ton of money that was printed in the last couple of years, and you can't print money and create debt without paying for it. And they generally pay for revenue that needs to generate to spend on keeping people home, as an example, like the beer bug, if there's a pandemic. I use that term loosely, obviously. Or if they have to, stimulate the economy with infrastructure and stuff like that. So they have to create tax revenue. And one of the best places they haven't tapped into yet that would generate a ton of tax revenue for them is taxing capital gains on a principal residence, which they don't do right now. Anyway, so let me read this to you again. Canadian taxpayers, the primary residence is their single largest asset. With recent price explosions, it is now an asset with a large amount of unrealized capital gains appreciation. As of 2022, the average Canadian household net worth is nearing $1 million of the capital gains from any potential sale. For the Canadian government, the inability to tax principal resident gains, therefore, it means millions of lost potential tax revenue. They already tax us everywhere. You buy gas, you pay yourself, you take an income from an employer, you buy any goods or service, you're paying taxes on it. You're paying taxes when you invest money outside of your retirement savings. Everything you do, they bend you over and they tax you, with the exception of your principal residence, which values, by the way, have exploded over the last few years in Canada. To give you an example, I bought my house, this one here, 2011 or so around 10 years now, and it's more than doubled in value. I'd probably say, yeah, it's definitely more than doubled in value, which is a rate of return that you're not going to get anywhere else, with the exception of if you're an early adopter of something like Bitcoin, for example. In upcoming budget proposals, the Canadian government will be looking for ways to make up for the financial deficits that they have experienced over the past few years, largely coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. One way they could potentially propose to help ease this debt is to fully or partially void the PRCGE, I'm assuming stands for Principal Residence Capital Gains Exemption. Okay. The only reason that the PRCGE has not already been attacked is a fear of voter reaction. However, and by the way, the federal government currently has a majority stake in voting rights right now in Canadian Parliament because they've partnered with the Socialist Party, the NDP. So Trudeau's Liberals partnered with the Socialist Party to basically push any legislation through. And of course, the Socialist Party's entire mantra is tax the rich, and they're going to say what they'll probably do if I were to take a guess at this, so they don't lose the confidence and the votes of the less wealthy Canadian voters, is they'll probably draw a line in the sand somewhere where they feel like it's only the wealthy that'll be affected or mostly affected, or they'll have some sliding scale system where if the house is worth over 2 or 3 million, then you pay 50%. If it's under 2 million, then it's 25%. If it's under a million, then it's 12% or something like that. That's what I suspect they would do to sort of hold their position. But either way, like, you tax $1 million at 12%, that's $120,000. That's not chump change. That's a fucking shit ton of cash for most people that they should have in their pockets, not stolen from them. Anyway, the only reason why this has not already been attacked is fear of voter reaction. However, demographics are changing this calculation. Many younger voters are currently not able to get into the housing market due to the recent extreme rise in housing prices. They have very little sympathy for those that would have to pay taxes on the astronomical price increase of their home. Limiting or eliminating the principal residence capital gains exemption also affects fewer voters on day-to-day basis. In contrast, raising the HST, by the way, is the harmonized sales tax, which is 13% whenever you buy anything. If you buy what they quote as a luxury vehicle now in Canada, by the way, which could mean, I don't know, you have a horse farm or you're a contractor and you need a diesel dually or something like that, that might cost you 120, 150 grand, depending on how you spec it. That's now considered a luxury vehicle. Anything you buy over $100,000 in Canada now is now subject to a much higher tax rate after 100 grand. So there's a lot of guys actually in the last year before that before that became law, January 1st of this year, that were rushing to make sure that they got their vehicles purchased and any expensive toys, if you will. Anyway, what would that mean if the principal residence capital gain exemption was eliminated? So Canadian homeowners could be paying up to 50% combined federal and provincial rates on their capital gains from the sale of the primary residence. For example, let's say a home was purchased for 100 grand 20 years ago, which is completely like average price for most people, even in Toronto, would have been paying 100 grand for a detached family residence with a white picket fence. That's all you really needed, probably somewhere between 100 and 150,000. I remember when my parents bought a house in a suburb when I was in grade 8 for 220,000, and that was considered a mansion at the time. It was like considered expensive. Those houses are now worth easily $3 to $3.5 million in that neighborhood. So that's how much residential home prices have moved here anyway. I know in a lot of parts of the world they're moving a lot as well, but you get the idea. Anyway, today that home sells for $1.1 million. This results in $1 million in capital gains. With a principal residence capital gains exemption, the homeowner will net $1.1 million for their retirement. If the principal residence capital gains exemption was eliminated, this would cut their net proceeds to $600,000. Canadians can find out. I guess there's a calculator here that he's inserted. Will principal residence capital gains exemption under threat? Is it time to take action? So let's see what his advice is here, because he's got three. I love the way that he breaks down these options. He's a very dude, Dave. Where are you, man? Let me check my emails again. Is he coming or what? Because he's so eloquent in the way that he breaks these down. No. Okay, let's throw this back up. So with principal residence, let me just move this over a little bit, try to make it a tiny bit bigger. And let's fill it up here. Boom, boom. You guys should be able to see it better. Okay. Is it time to take action? Skeptics may think that imminent elimination of the principal residence capital gains exception is unlikely given the inevitable uproar from older voters. I would agree. Nevertheless, even if one puts the odds at this outcome at 25%, prudence would dictate that an outcome worth preparing to avoid, especially if a strategy avoids the impact of eliminating the principal residence capital gains exemption. 25% is still $250,000. In previous blog posts, I describe reacting to potential financial and other threats to your family wealth and well-being in the same way that you would act if living in a wildfire zone. Namely, that you would engage in fire prevention, acquire fire insurance, and map out a fire escape plan in case you perceive the threat to be imminent. Leaving yourself unprepared in a situation like this may lead to detrimental financial repercussions. Acting preemptively before the fire reaches you will save your fiscal house from suffering. So let's see what his advice is here. So this is a strategy. He's got 3 steps here. He's got fire prevention. We've got this giant ass, looks like field fire is an illustration. So fire prevention. In this situation, fire prevention will simply mean selling your primary residence sooner rather than later. Because of the current state of the Canadian housing market, you'll net a significant sum for retirement. Those proceeds can then be applied to renting in Canada. Alternatively, you might institute a fire escape plan and retire abroad to avoid other inevitable Canadian taxes. In the chat, guys, if you live in a country somewhere where they're starting to talk about this stuff as well, let me know. I'm really curious. Step 2 is fire insurance. Fire insurance is having a second citizenship. Oh, here we go. Dave, you're here.
Sorry, I had a little Ukrainian crisis.
Was it a time zone thing or?
No. I had a client who's just escaped from the Ukraine that I dealing with a.
So I started to go through your. Why isn't it added to screen here? There we go. I started to go through your blog article and I got to fire prevention and fire insurance as remedies to this problem. So we've already talked about the problem, why it exists and why they're trying to implement it. Maybe I'll let you take over since you're the expert and you wanted to cover this topic and you wrote the blog anyway, but
sure.
So step 2, as far as a remedy with fire insurance, can you explain that to the viewers?
Sure. So depending on what jurisdiction we're talking about, so if we're in Canada, you simply need to become a non-resident, which means that you need to be able to live somewhere else. If you're in the US, you need to, because they have citizenship-based taxation, you need to have another citizenship in place, which you may have because you moved to the United States and naturalized, so you have the citizenship of your birth, or you may have the citizenship because you had a foreign parent, or you may have moved to another country and become naturalized there, or a lineage, or a citizenship by investment. So you need to have another citizenship in order to give up your American. Australia, for example, is becoming non-resident in Australia is a bit more of a sticky wicket than, for example, Canada, in that it's best that you move to a tax treaty jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So buying a citizenship in a place which doesn't have a tax treaty with Australia isn't particularly helpful if you clearly want to leave there. So you have to look at what are the rules in order to escape the fire of your current taxing jurisdiction, and do I need simply another residence? Do I need residence in a jurisdiction with a tax treaty, or do I need another citizenship also?
Are you suggesting that you can retain that residence in Canada, but abandon your citizenship and not pay the capital gains tax if you're not a citizen?
No. So Canada taxes based on residence. If you sojourn, spend 183 days in Canada, or if you have centralized your mode of living in Canada. So giving up your Canadian, so if you're a permanent resident or work permit holder, or even a visitor who spends too much time in Canada, you're going to become tax resident. So in order to cease to become tax resident, you need to move, and you need to get rid of certain ties in Canada.
Okay, so then you have to dispense of the asset. You have to sell the house.
Correct. So when you leave Canada, it's as if you die to the Canadian tax system. So it's a deemed disposition for capital gains purposes. And the point I was making in the blog was right now, a lot of Canadians have a lot of their wealth in their principal residence. Of course, they have an exemption from capital gains on that, which they would also have when they became non-resident. They may also have small business exemptions, etc. But what happens if in the future they limit or they completely get rid of the capital gains exemption on principal residence? And you can say, well, that would be political suicide. And sure, if your voters were only boomers, but if you have if you have millennials who say, well, the housing market is way out of, I can't afford to even rent, hardly own,
Mhm.
but I can vote. So I don't really care that, you know, the boomers have to pay capital gain on this house that they bought for 100,000, which is now worth 2 million.
Got it. I was speculating on this earlier before you came on, but are there other countries that are currently talking about taxing capital gains at the rate that Trudeau is in Canada?
There is a push and a pull. Countries tend to try to tax what I call their native golden geese. So Canadian government tries to tax Canadians who have born, raised here, and who have life inertia in Canada much more than they try to tax foreigners who they are trying to attract to their shores. And
Hmm.
this is true in a lot of jurisdictions. So you can abuse your native golden geese because they're much less, they'll take a lot more abuse before they'll fly away.
Hmm.
Whereas if you want to attract the foreign golden geese, you have to make it more attractive than the jurisdiction that they're in so far. So if we look at, for example, all the controversy that's going on right now in the UK, that with regards to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which would be the equivalent in Canada of the finance minister, his wife is something called a non-dom. Well, the UK is, why do all these Russians and Greeks and Saudis and wealthy Indians live in the UK? Well, because they only get taxed on UK source income if they're not from there. So they have a regime which has been around for a century and a half to
Okay.
attract wealthy foreigners. That's why they're all there. Well, now it looks like, there's a great chance that system may be thrown kind of under the bus. And one of the problems is that if it does, um, where do these people go to next?
Got it.
Well,
Okay.
get a backup plan, get fire insurance, and get a fire escape plan.
So let's talk about the fire escape plan because that's step 3 in your article. And by the way, for those of you guys watching, I dropped David's article in the live chat, so you can find it and read it there later if you want.
Right. So a fire escape plan is, depending on your jurisdiction, it'll show what's involved. So if we look at Canada, it's preparing for that deemed disposition. So one of the things I thought people should think about is, if you are worried that in the future you're going to have to pay capital gains, some or all capital gains in your principal residence, maybe you should think about selling that now while you have that exemption, so that your sales price gross equals net,
Hmm.
as opposed to having only the net proceeds after capital gains. You can then either decide, I'm going to move now, or you can say, I'm going to start renting, or I'm going to put things into capital gain, much more efficient capital gain vehicles. So I'm going to put it into shares which are going to grow as opposed to paying dividends.
Hmm.
So that it's a fire escape plan is, let's look at your asset by asset, how that's going to be impacted by the departure tax in Canada, as we call it.
Hmm.
Also, what do I do in kind of, I'm just going to, what am I going to do with regards to lifestyle things? So this is the point where you start to kind of declutter your life.
Hmm.
Okay. And one of the big things that Canadians always go on about is, we have free healthcare. You don't have free healthcare. You pay a premium every April 30th for that
Hmm.
healthcare. Thank you very much. And healthcare is a commodity that you can go and buy in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And when you compare the premium for that healthcare, so for example, I live in Poland. The top income tax rate in Poland, and there's no kind of provincial version, is 19%. And they're dropping that down. They're looking at dropping that down to 6%.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Poland also has a 23% VAT tax.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't spend that money, I don't pay the VAT. They also have very high excise taxes on everything from alcohol to certain commodities, etc. So I've organized my life so that I don't pay a lot of VAT, and I've organized my life so I don't have a lot of taxable income that's even subject to the 19%.
Mm-hmm.
For that, there is the equivalent of kind of National Healthcare Service or Canadian Medicare, whatever we want to call it, Canadian version.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, there's also private healthcare coverage, which is not only kind of pretty good, it's actually world class because they also have a large medical tourism industry here.
Mm-hmm.
So I had twins; those are high risk births, and in the specialist OB-GYN that we had, sitting in there were Russians, Saudis, Americans, Brits, because they would all come to this top clinician and clinic. So for my family, just to give you, so there's myself, my wife, and two 8-year-old twins, and we pay in. So we have a gold-plated medical coverage, and so that's 800 zloty a month, divide by 4 for the US dollar. So for $200, that includes dental, cosmetic surgery, everything.
So you're covered from head to toe.
Head to toe, 4 people in our family, 200 US a month.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So compare that to what you sent to Revenue Canada last April.
Yeah. It's very expensive and it's a shitty system. I mean, I have an email on my list that talks about how they really messed up the beer bug treatment with a completely unnecessary and toxic drug called remdesivir. So if you're on my email list, you can read about that there. If you want to know how to get on my email list, it's pinned in the top of all my videos. You can find it. So how far off is this new law from, or sorry, how far off, is this new bill from becoming law and getting royal assent? Like, is this something that they're starting to vote on? Is this something that they're building? Like, what do we, like, do I have 2 years to sell my house or 6 months?
well, so this is the thin edge of the wedge. So what Chrystia Freeland has proposed in the last budget.
Oh, this is Freeland's idea, is it?
Yes. So Chrystia Freeland put into the last budget the first kind of time that this whole long sacred principal residence exemption, and said, well, now we're going to put a restriction because we want to avoid the flippers. So you have to, in order to get the principal residence exemption, have held onto the property for at least a year. Otherwise, we'll consider that trading. Otherwise, that's considered ordinary income rates. Well, that's quite a change. So if your business is buy, renovate, and flip, you've been enjoying, if you've been doing a principal residence, you've done quite well. That's being attacked. Now that, the camel's got its nose in the tent, my question is, how long before you have the whole camel in the tent? Which is, okay, well, the next, we need more money again. So we've already done that. Okay, so let's go after this a bit more. We've done some polling, and, the youth vote we can get by saying, oh, these prices have gone through the roof. People shouldn't get complete capital gains exemption on, they should maybe get half of it. Or we'll cap it as, oh, these really wealthy urbanites, we're going to cap it at $1 million or 500,000 or 200,000. The problem with the definition of we're only doing the rich is the definition of rich constantly changes depending upon the perspective of your voters.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it before you came on, but I think it's going to be introduced as a sliding scale because the only way they're going to push this through is with the support of the NDP government, which is a socialist government, and they want the votes of the people that are lower income earners. So they're not going to apply a 50% tax rate, I don't think, anyway, on like a value of 250,000, for example. There's not many houses that would sell for that around here anyway, but I think that what they'll probably do is they'll have the highest tax rate on like 2 million up, maybe 3 million up, then slide it down to 25% at maybe a million, and then under a million, 500,000 a million, it might be something like 12%. But it's certainly something that they've been talking about for the last couple of years that I've heard about anyway. So when you emailed me on it with the article, I was definitely interested immediately. But I know how long it takes for them to propose a bill, get it approved, go through royal assent, and then it become law. So because when I did the Bill 55 lobbying back in, I think it was 2011, 2012, it didn't become law until 2015. So it may
Right.
take a few years for this to go through. But I think the problem's going to be is once enough people realize that it's going to go through, the market's going to get flooded with home sales, which is going to lower the prices.
Correct. And the other thing that you have to remember is we now, again, I'm not in his mind, but I'm thinking that Justin Trudeau is not eager to go back to the polls again. He thought he had a moment that
I
he
think
could
he's
get a
good until
majority government, and
2024, 2025, if I'm
yeah,
not mistaken.
and he didn't. So he's going to have to keep that coalition going, and he can always say, this capital gains, shrinking exemption. Yeah, but it's better than the wealth tax.
Mm-hmm.
Better than that wealth tax. And so that's the thing that they keep looking at. Oh yeah, I mean, we would never have thought of this before, but it's COVID and stuff, and it's better than the wealth tax, and that's the way they'll sell it. And they'll also sell it as a generational thing,
Mm-hmm.
um, because there are young voters now who just can't even think about getting into the market because the entry point is so high.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't really care that the people in houses that they could never even rent, are going to have to pay some capital gain on what they think is a windfall.
Let me just go to the chat here and grab some of the super chats and comments. Somebody mentioned BlackRock. I don't know if you're familiar, but apparently BlackRock's buying up a ton of real estate in the U.S.
Yes.
Single house residences. How is that going to affect the housing market in the U.S. with stock?
What
And
it
what are they
what it's
doing with
done.
the houses that they're buying?
So they're buying the houses and turning them around as rental properties.
Hmm.
It's an asset class that they're looking at because there's a solid underpinning of an asset there. So if you think back to your asset backed securities, it turns it around and is good for securities, but they actually own the houses as opposed to the famous Jenga of structured prior to 2008. Um, they are also riding the wave of huge inflation in the rental market. So you've got an asset which you can buy, you can turn around, you can rent at a higher value. It's got a great return on it, and you can turn around and leverage that. And you've got a security which is asset backed with a very steady stream of income. So that's
I'm
why
told also that when they're
BlackRock is
buying
going there.
these single family residences, that they're overbidding on them. I've heard as much as 25 to 50% more than market value. Is that correct?
Sure, they're absolutely driving. If you look at places like Florida, the amounts in urban centers, and they're now starting to move into secondary markets. I had a client of mine whose family had built up about a $50 million portfolio of basically residential real estate. They had a
Hmm.
bunch of tenants and things, and this was the family business. Dad passed away. His son got the business and was very good at it. Wife got sick, and it was BlackRock came in,
Hmm.
and they offered him. Uh, I think he said it was something like 15 times EBITDA, and so he said sure, and they also have the economy of scale of being able to deal with huge volumes
Hmm.
of construction. Now, what that means for the tenants, of course, is that you can't call up, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, who you had a personal relationship before. now you've got a number of 1-800 I want to complain to BlackRock, and so
Got it. Let me grab some of these super chats here. Chris just says grateful for the cast. Thank you, brother. Tom says this whole "you will own nothing and be happy" BS is happening everywhere. Soon, everyone everywhere will become renters. That's I think that soundbite "you will own nothing and be happy" was Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. I'm not sure if you heard about this guy and the WEF and his connection to several of the world leaders, including Trudeau, Macron, and the Australian and New Zealand fellows.
yeah, no, I didn't, but I mean, you will own nothing and be happy, BS. Okay, well, that's what you want to do, fill
Well,
your boots, my friend.
that's what they're trying to sell the world now. As globalists, is you don't
Yeah,
need stuff to be happy. I remember about 10 or 12 years ago, I was at a mastermind conference, and one of the thoughts that they were kind of like tossing around at the time was, in the future, you'll own nothing and have access to everything. And that pretty much became true. Like, you didn't need a car, you could just call Uber on your app. You didn't need a house, you could just do an Airbnb rental, right? So the theme and theory around that, becoming something and developing into something actually, became true. But now this Klaus Schwab guy has like turned that around, and it sounds like BlackRock is playing a part in this, grabbing up a lot of single family residences. But there's a lot of people that are getting frustrated with what's going on and what they're starting to see when they pay attention to some of these lyrics that these globalists start to sing. Ernesto says, sounds like they're changing the rules for foreign investors in homes in Canada. How would that affect these tax exit strategies? Do you have any thoughts on that, David?
yeah. Well, that was Ernesto. That was the inspiration. Seeing that in that budget was the inspiration for that blog, which is okay. We've now seen for the first time a Canadian politician who has gone after and limited the principal residence exemption. And so if we anticipate the predictable, they're going to, oh, that didn't go, that wasn't, didn't cost us very many points in the polls. Let's keep going after that. Let's keep going after that. And we'll paint it in a way that it's the others. Right now, the others are foreign investors driving up your home prices.
Mm-hmm.
Soon it'll be the greedy boomers who, rode an extraordinary increase in that particular asset class of residential real estate. And, it's one of the things, what you own. I grew up in an auto family, and Rich, I wasn't driving the nice cars you had. We had the company cars that my father at GM would bring home and things. But one of the things I learned very quickly is he was buying and selling cars. They were entitled to them, and he would sell them before the 1 year mark because of the depreciation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference when you're buying an asset that may appreciate in value if you buy a collectible versus your standard off the line car which is going to depreciate. So the problem with residences are it ties you to a particular location. It increases your life inertia.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you less nimble. It has been a great way of increasing your wealth. It has a benefit over a T-bill in that you can't sleep in a T-bill.
Mm-hmm.
There's always been a fairly liquid market for homes. It wasn't as easy as going on and saying, sell Microsoft, buy Apple, but with the speed of home sales, it was fairly liquid. And it had this huge advantage of capital gain exemption. Well, if you've taken away that capital gain exemption, holding that particular asset, you still need a place to sleep. But the advantage of, and if the market is really depressed because they've taken away the capital gains exemption, so nobody, the prices are naturally going to drop, then you're kind of stuck.
Is there a capital gains exemption in the U.S., by the way?
It's limited. It's limited to
residence?
500 because you also in the U.S. you're able to write off your mortgage interest.
So it's limited to 500,000 in capital gains, and then after that you're paying taxes.
Correct.
What's the tax rate?
combined, well, the top federal tax rate is 23.8%. It's 20% capital gain, and there's a 3.8% Obama surcharge, but they always charge it. So it's kind of like, HST, you got to pay it. So, and then you have whatever state you're in, there may also be capital gain. So if you're in Florida or Texas, there's no state tax. If you're in a high state tax jurisdiction like New York or California, now you're starting to crank on another 10 to 13% on top of that.
Got it. JRR's here in the chat saying David's great and provides a variety of options. Thanks, Rich, for having him on again. Yeah, if you didn't see the last one that we did, just search for David Lesperance on my channel, and it'll pop up. You should watch it. We talked at length about passports, and I wanted to kind of switch gears now because I've only got about 20 more minutes, and have you talk a little bit about the importance of I don't know how to even, define it, like the freedom, the ability to maneuver. One of the points that you made last time, which really stuck out for me, is that you don't own your passport, and your government has a right at any time, if they wish, to take it away from you and prevent your travel. They kind of did that in Canada anyway, with the social credit system that they implemented with vaccination, because if you're not vaccinated, you can't travel. So it's like your passport's kind of useless to fly out of Canada if you don't have proof of vaccination. So can you talk a little bit more about passports, the importance of having multiple passports, who should consider having multiple passports, perhaps what countries are ideal to acquire a passport in, so that you have, you have a backup plan to your backup plan, sort of thing?
Sure. And I actually did another blog recently called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. And I took, for example, if you were a Russian, you could travel around fairly easily, get residences and citizenships and things. And all of a sudden, Putin made your Russian passport a pariah. What's going to happen when MBS, the King of Saudi Arabia, is going to die in the next year or so? MBS is a young guy. He's going to be around for 50 years. Is he going to engage in activities for which the world will view him as a pariah? So you've got that sovereign risk that they will do that. You've also got the sovereign risk against individuals. You don't want to be wealthy in China these days because we've got the second Chinese curse. May you come to the attention of the Emperor Jack Ma and many others. So you've got that. You've also, so your passport, correct. If you look at any passport from any country, in the inside, it'll say this is the property of Canada, US, Australia, wherever. So your passport is the document that the government has issued you up to the moment where they haven't, where they take that away. So if they want to restrict your travel for whatever reason, because they think that you are a pandemic risk, because they are personally going after you, because they want your assets,
because they don't like what you say on the internet.
They don't like what you say on the internet, whatever. If you've only got that one document, you're kind of got all your eggs in that one basket. So that's one thing you're doing. The other is, and you want to get fire insurance of alternatives to that. The other thing, and I think I told the story, Rich, in our last conversation, and I always have to premise it that my siblings and I didn't go out night clubbing looking for Europeans to marry, but as it turned out, my sister married a Latvian, my brother married an Italian, I married a Pole, my sister married an Irishman, and all of my nieces and nephews have done everything from study to gap years to work. And I've got a nephew that's at Trinity College in Dublin right now. I got a niece that's been in Brussels for about 8 years. So it's also gives you a great amount of opportunity and mobility. So if you only had a Canadian passport, and you had, for example, and a lot of North Americans, Canadians and Americans before thought, well, if I want to go somewhere, I saw something in Condé Nast Traveler, I want to go there. Oh my God, the Australians are making me, pay $70 for a visa. Yeah, but it's an online kind of airport tax. But all of a sudden, you couldn't travel. and you had some restrictions, and that was a big surprise to a lot of North Americans. Whereas for many parts of the world, they realized, hey, I'm from India, I'm from various countries. I can't easily travel. I have no guarantee I'm going to be able to get a visa to go to this place. And the reason I need a visa was you know, I came out of my mother's womb in this jurisdiction, or I had
Hmm.
this parentage. Whereas North Americans, we never really had that. I had a little taste of this back during the SARS episode. I happened to travel to Belize on some business, and if you can remember, that was the time when Toronto was noted as a bit of a hotbed. And I flew into Belize through Miami, so they didn't know I started in Toronto. And they looked at my Canadian passport, and all of a sudden, you know, I was waiting for the guys in the hazmat suits to come out and surrounded me. And they go, "Toronto, are you from Toronto?" And I happened by complete fluke to have renewed my passport in Windsor. I
Hmm.
go, "Oh, no, 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 I live in Windsor." I go, "Okay." And I thought that was one of the first times as a Canadian where I thought, "Oh my God, having a Canadian passport is a potential issue." And
Hmm.
so I had a flash of what it was like for a great part of the world to be able to make sure that you had that, because the rights and freedoms you have today can be gone tomorrow.
Hmm. So, which countries are ideal to look at to acquire a second or like? How many passports do you want? Two, three? Like, what's like in your view?
So, it's always kind of up for speculation as to what's the best combination of passports to have. For an Irish passport is excellent because not only do you have access to the 27 countries of the EU
Hmm.
under the Treaty of Rome, you also have access to the UK even after Brexit because of something called the Common Travel Agreement, which was what came into place when they formed the Republic of Ireland. So Irish have access to the UK, UK have access to Irish. Portuguese, for example, have access to Ireland, but they don't have access to the UK. So Ireland, great
Is
combination.
that a relatively easy passport to get?
Two ways: if you happen to have the right lineage, um, you can apply for it. Basically, if you have a parent or grandparent who
Hmm.
was born in Ireland, you can
Hmm.
get it from lineage. If you have somebody a little further beyond, you can apply and get a residence permit in Ireland. And you can apply to have a shorter than the normal 5-year naturalization period by saying you have Irish associations, and that's generally about 3 years. And or you can qualify for a residence permit either under a residence by investment program, which is €1 million, or there are some family offices or skilled workers. Get
Hmm.
that, wait the 5 years and become naturalized there. So Ireland. Canada is actually pretty good if you don't live in Canada, because we don't have citizenship-based taxation. We don't have mandatory military service, and we have preferred access to the U.S. under what we used to call NAFTA, but now we have to call CUSMA. And the last one would be New Zealand, because it has access not only to New Zealand, but also to Australia. No military service, no taxation based on citizenship.
I know there's a lot of
And
people listening to this right now going, why would I want to have a passport from New Zealand or Australia given how they treated people there the last couple of years and locked them right down? Like I think they probably had the most uh, restrictive policies when it came to this beer bug pandemic.
sure, so but what it does is that's one. What you want is a variety of options, which you'll use in different situations.
Hmm.
In some cases, that New Zealand passport is not going to be helpful. In some cases, you'll pull out the Irish passport. In
Hmm.
some cases, you'll want to pull out the Canadian passport. In some cases, you'll want to pull out the New Zealand passport. So you're getting yourself a variety. It's optionality that you're looking at,
So you're
and not
basically
everyone
becoming
is.
James Bond and having your three, four
Well, it used to
passport
be quite.
options depending on how you want to travel.
Yeah, I had one client that we actually had 8 citizenships for. He would have had 9, but he gave up his US citizenship.
Hmm.
It was wonderful being his lawyer. But he had gone well beyond what was, hedging his bets to taking
Hmm.
it on as a hobby. I mean, but if you're to look at kind of a couple of different ones, you want to get into ones that give you the rights to live in multiple jurisdictions. So New Zealand also has access to Australia. And the reason I chose New Zealand versus Australia is because of the tax rules are, if you're going to go actually live in New Zealand,
Hmm.
they are much more favorable than Australia, but it gives you access to Australia.
Mm.
Um, so you put together, and the key is what fits the person's budget, what are their family needs. It's also got to be something that you can sell at the breakfast table.
Hmm.
My first mentor, brilliant tax lawyer, but as many of us lawyers had a bit of Asperger's and didn't really understand kind of, and he put together these plans that require people to live on a rock in the middle of the ocean. And I go, nobody's ever going to actually do this.
Hmm.
And so one of the things is it has to be a balance between what fits for that person, fits their budget, fits their timelines, meets their concerns, meets their needs, meets their preferences. Um, and so while there's a lot of commonality, each one is kind of, fit to measure at the end of the day.
What percentage of the population do you think actually takes these measures to allow the flexibility and freedom, to travel, to live, and move around the world? Like, is it less than 1% of people that do this?
Depends on the jurisdiction. So if you're in a place like Hong Kong or China,
Hmm.
you're going to have 60 or 70% of the people will have some alternative residence or citizenship because they've been thinking about it for a long time.
Hmm.
When you're looking at North Americans and Canadians, they're much earlier in the adoption phase. So they're which means that they're also lower on the learning curve on kind of what's involved in getting all these things. So they're much more susceptible to what I call the citizenship by investment salespeople. I'm made a whole bunch of money in crypto. I'm gonna listen to Katie the Russian and get citizenship in Dominica. And
Hmm.
okay, I've got citizenship in Dominica. It's done nothing for you tax wise.
Hmm.
I actually just did an analysis on Satoshi Island, which is this island in Vanuatu that's supposedly coming out with NFTs, and that you're supposed to rush there and buy them if you're into crypto. And kind of, okay, let's ask some basic questions about it. So I just wrote a blog called Satoshi Island is this blockchain's new fire festival.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's you getting yourself learning about these things, uh, so that you're an informed consumer, and you can also tell the difference between kind of somebody who really knows what they're talking about. And again, I work with a team. Um, so while my particular expertise is getting rid of resident citizenships and domiciles, I know how that impacts taxation. I know how it impacts lifestyle. I know how it impacts family law, for example. People always focus on taxes. Taxes are a percentage of income. Divorce is a percentage of capital. And so people would rush to the UK because it's a tax haven, and then discover, oh my God, it's a divorce capital,
Hmm.
and half of my stuff is gone.
Hmm.
So you have to look at all of these kind of issues, and again come up with a plan which makes sense financially, but that you can also sell at the breakfast table. If there's other family members that are involved. Um, and it fits the timetable of the people. I mean, of course, you know, you're going to be having different concerns when you've got young children versus when those children are heading out the door for college or adulthood, um, etc. So, where are you in? Do you need to be in a specific location to make and maintain your wealth?
Hmm.
Have you got the ability to, if you're uh, investing, you'll have more options. If you're a landlord of residential properties, well, you better make sure that you have access to be able to go and check on those properties.
Hmm.
Whereas if you're, investing in public or private markets, you don't need to be in physical proximity to those assets.
Gotcha. Um, all right, guys, I got to start to wrap up. So, if you're interested in any of the stuff that David's been talking about, you should reach out to him. His website is lesperanceassociates.com. And he's the kind of guy that can help you build a passport portfolio that will give you the freedom to travel and reside where you please. Who's the ideal client for you? Like, is there a certain net worth that you need?
Um, it depends. So I have everything from young professionals who are kind of digital mobiles, but they also have the ability of they don't have a lot of life inertia. They don't have a house and a spouse and a dog,
Hmm.
so they're much more flexible and they've got time periods. Um, all the way to people who, business owners. I have a particular developed a particular expertise with regards to people in the crypto ecosystem,
Okay.
everything from early adopters to miners to exchange founders to people who are engaging in DeFi, looking at NFTs, those types of things. It's just I've gotten very good at how different jurisdictions treat that from a tax point of view, and so everything from Satoshi Island, the place to go to, Puerto Rico, El Salvador,
Hmm.
Berlin,
There's an
Portugal.
African country now that's made it legal tender. I can't remember which
Yeah,
one.
Central African Republic.
Yeah. So, yeah, reach out and find David if you need some proper guidance on this, and he can help you facilitate whatever it is that you're trying to structure. Again, if you guys are so, another part of this cast, which I kind of hit on at the very beginning, is the kind of people that move around that have multiple passports that figure out how to minimize their tax obligations to centralized governments are generally entrepreneurs, right? So they run and own their own business. And my course, the
Yes.
School of Entrepreneurship, is currently open for enrollment. The link to join is pinned at the top of the live chat. It's also going to be in the description and pinned at the top comment. Today's April 28th. The course is only open for enrollment until the 30th. It's offered at $997. And what it does is it explains to you what the best and most successful entrepreneurs do to structure their businesses so it's easy, lucrative, and fun for them to operate. Because the vast majority of people that start businesses, and I'm sure, Dave, you've dealt with a lot of guys like this, they structure them in such a way where they're hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. There's not a lot of profit. They've got all kinds of issues. They've got tax issues. They just don't run it right. And you really have to take into consideration if you're going to lean into entrepreneurship as a starter, or if you're currently running something that's not working for you, what the best are doing. And I've collected all that information. I've sanitized it and distilled it in this course. You can go check it out. Again, the enrollment closes in 2 days. So if this is something that interests you, check it out, guys. David, any closing thoughts before we run?
Yeah, just on that, part of that fire escape plan is when you're looking at the types of businesses and the types of things you're talking about, Rich, on setting up and running your businesses,
Mm-hmm.
have a view to, future doing this in different locations
Mm-hmm.
and what is going to be the tax ramifications. And so that'll have a big impact on the choices that you make in what paths you start on. It's much better to kind of think about those things earlier as opposed to later on trying to
Mm-hmm.
unravel things. And a final thought is for those people who are, really want to kind of start to get up to speed on this, I'd recommend kind of reading a lot of my blogs and media posts. You'll find a lot of good information in there.
Thanks, David. See you guys next time. Give the video a like and comment below, and we'll see you in the next show.
And thanks for putting up for my late